Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Bookwormies. I'm your host, Aaron Helton, here to take you down the wonderful road of nonfiction. Today, I've got I usually say, hey, I've got a fun one, right? But I've actually got an interesting one, I want to say, a unique one to talk about today. Today's book is King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. Now, first, a couple kind of disclaimers, descriptors, explanation, I guess, of the book. I found this book kind of surfing around on the book talk or the Instagram reels that kind of show different book recommendations because my algorithm is full of the type of books I read. So a lot of psychology, a lot of self-help, a lot of spirituality, and a lot of business and management and leadership books. So King, Warrior, Magician, Lover is about the masculine energies. And these are 4 different archetypes of masculine archetypes. And they all have their fullness and then 2 shadow sides to them, an active and a passive shadow side for each of these archetypes. Now, as far as the disclaimers and all that, first thing first, this actually came out in 1990, so this is a little over a 30 years old book. However, I feel that a lot of things from the 90s, they hold up pretty well, and a lot of the concepts kind of go full circle, and we've kind of, in my opinion, a lot of the best self-help, spirituality, leadership, anything, when you can explain a topic and bring it back down to a simplified framework, that can be both a huge boon and a wild strain. It can be a good or a bad tool, depending. Sometimes oversimplifying something causes a lot of damage because it forces you to see things in black and white. I appreciate things that simplify things in the frameworks that can be applied in different circumstances. That's what I'll say as far as simplification. I don't like black and white simplification. I do like, hey, here's a framework, see how it applies to you, It's kind of on a spectrum. So very interesting. That is kind of where I feel that this book falls is, hey, here's some ideas. There are some binary concepts in the sense of, oh, you're either in your fullness or you have this shadow association. However, I feel that in any sort of framework of the Freudian or Jungian type or Jungian, I don't know if it's a hard J or a Y sound, but it kind of leads to take it as it applies. It can apply in multiple different situations. Such as in one situation, you may be in your, so to speak, fullness, right? In this idea, whatever the positive aspect is. And then other situations, there may be less healthy applications, and those are the places to work on. So I believe that falls outside of, while it's a binary concept, it is not a binary framework. Does that make sense? That's kind of the lens that I take with these things. So that said, yes, a little older book. Additionally, it does focus on masculine energy. I did talk about this before in, was it Man Enough by Justin Baldoni? Obviously, as I speak multiple times, I can only speak to my perception and my life experiences, my personal view, and my experiences, etc. So I am, of course, a man, and so that would be why this book applies to me. If you're an individual who is just interested in male psyche, go for it, or masculine, rather, I will not say male. Or if you are a non-binary individual who is curious about masculine mindsets and such, I personally believe this book was really interesting in reading about because it splits into multiple different archetypes. You don't put yourself in just one archetype. It talks about how these are all different sides throughout history and different religious or spiritual frameworks. And it was really interesting. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit more about each of these aspects and kind of talk a bit about how I resonated with it without kind of spoiling the book, I guess I'll say. So the archetypes as a whole, kind of the king essentially talks about this parental sort of authority sort of archetype and role that masculine energy in a sense would take, with the shadow self sort of being, well, I have power, but I'm not going to abuse it, or I don't want power in the first place. Kind of, I refuse to jump into my king role, almost thinking like Lion King, of I'm going to run away from my role as king of the jungle, with Simba and Mufasa. The warrior archetype is that action taking or almost protector sort of archetype. And there's an interesting thought in this book talking about the warrior as a fighter in the sense of wars and violence, and warriors in the sense of tribal warriors or, samurai, infantry sort of concepts. And so it was interesting to see the contrast also with speaking about the warrior in more modern day terms as well, I will say. While it was, the 90s and there were some crude examples, there are still a lot of kind of elegant examples as well. So I feel that the authors kind of had a wide breadth on the explanations that they gave for these archetypes and some of the examples that helped you to kind of resonate with them. The magician was kind of, I apologize. I didn't mention the shadow selves of the warrior, this action taker, so to speak. The warrior, of course, is that fight, that dominance, that kind of, etc. So the shadow sides are, of course, unfortunately more towards those abusive sides, those that are kind of overusing the assertiveness. And then the other would be kind of the opposite, which is more of a kind of victim kind of utilization, like an unhealthy kind of shadow side, an unhealthy relationship with assertion as a whole. And it's almost like it bottles up and kind of the energy flies back at the individual. And that would be the shadow side of kind of that passivity sense. Without say a little bit about that magician. Magician is kind of the person that has knowledge, like secret knowledge. It's described as the shaman, knowledge seeker, a medicinal person, could be a doctor, a lawyer, psychology practitioner, any of these different concepts, even a tradesman, electrician, anybody that has secret knowledge. So anybody that gets to a point where they have this knowledge, and the shadow selves are those that overindulge versus not underindulge, but refuse to jump into the role, the responsibility of the role, I would say. And so the magician, one side is that expert, I'll lord over my information. I'll say, look at me, I've got all this fancy information, you don't, so I'm better than you. And that's that shadow side. The alternative, of course, is I have all this information, but I'm just going to hoard it and nobody needs to know but me. It's just mine, essentially. And so, of course, both of these, again, as always, these are the shadow associations and the shadow ways that these archetypes are showing up. And finally, there's the lover, which is, hey, I care for you. That's in the fullness, it is, hey, I love. It's love. It doesn't really need an explanation. I feel it is kindness, consideration, romanticization of different aspects of life. It is joy, essentially. And of course, the shadow selves, overindulgence of love or completely cutting yourself off from that energy. I think those are somewhat self-explanatory. The interesting thing about all these is, as I mentioned, they were connected. And so I was really resonant as I sat and read through this book. And as always, I read books slow, but I really, really, I took about probably a full month and a half on this book, just consistently reading and rereading different passages. It comes out actually at about, let's see, how many pages is this? I think about 200, right? About 160. So a little over 150, 160 pages. So it's a very quick read, relative to many of the books that I've read before and recommended. It's a quick read. However, I definitely, being 27 and a man, definitely am pulling these different ideas and these different data points and these different considerations of what does it mean to show up in a zone of both wanting to balance being a boy, of just kind of having fun and being more of that immature and kind of, doing whatever I want, within reason and with, respectful of other people, but also kind of, not cleaning as much, having the bachelor pad, right? And then the other side of that responsibility, what does it look like for me to take care of somebody? What does it look like for me to show up in a almost parental father figure sort of way? How do I show up in a guiding sort of energy for my clients as a coach, balancing those sides of myself? So it was definitely something that resonated quite a bit with the current stage I'm in of my journey. And so I really appreciated talking about all these archetypes and how they kind of help each other. Any one of these archetypes kind of running tandem and running the show. It makes me think of that Pixar movie, Inside Out, where all the different emotions are trying to take control, and it requires a balance. The king having this energy of authority without the warrior energy of action, then there would be authority without purpose. A warrior, that action, that drive, that ambition, without the lover archetype or the magician archetype to have the knowledge and the consideration of others, would just create, again, abusive action or inconsiderate action. And so it really resonated with me, this book. One of the things I really appreciated as well was there are a lot of examples, because this is a spiritual book, I guess I would say, because it talks about, it is a psychology book essentially, but it's also a spirituality. So I would put it more in the spirituality bucket because of the way it talked about these different ideas. And it really did well, in my opinion, of balancing different religious backgrounds, in my opinion. Of course, there was still a focus on, Christianity and such, as this is a Western book, I believe. However, it talked a little bit about balance of like Taoism and Buddhism and having these different ideas of like, if you have this concept, here's where it shows up in different media. Like it talks about the king, right, as a authority figure. And it also talks about like emperor in the sense of like, it uses an example of a man's dream of like a Chinese emperor was a way in which his kingly energy was trying to reach out to him. And so it talks also about, like the book speaks of examples that apply not just to like Western religious backgrounds. And I really appreciate that, because I think when we talk about spirituality, it's very easy to fall almost into that binary of framework of, well, here's the Christian way to do it. Here's the Hinduism way to do it. Here's the Buddhist way to do it. Here's the, all the different ways. And sometimes it can fall flat because if you're not within that in-group, so to speak, sometimes these lessons can automatically fall flat if you're not an individual that's automatically open-minded and saying, okay, this may not be my religion, but how can it apply under the structure that I am familiar with? So I really appreciate how the book used a couple different examples that could apply from different religious backgrounds. So I loved that a lot. Otherwise, I really enjoyed this. If I would say anything to improve in it, I really couldn't. It's an older book. There are a couple moments of, language that was popular in the 90s that is no longer as relevant. I try not to speak too much to how a book can improve when it's a little older due to the nature of, it's almost low-hanging fruit to say, oh, don't use this word or don't use this example, or that's not a proper cultural reference anymore, because it's low-hanging fruit. Like if it was made in today's day and time, it would use examples in today's day and time that were more relevant, because that is the nature of writing a book in a certain time. That said, please pick it up. Obviously this is something that resonated quite a bit with me personally, but if you're somebody struggling with different aspects within yourself, look into it and see if this is something that could help out. If you read Man Enough by Justin Baldoni that I talked about before, check this out. See if that was something that resonated with you and you're looking to explore more of that energy, like definitely check it out. And again, this is not just like a book for the boys. Right? Like I definitely wanted to give that disclaimer at the start. Like it's something that resonates with me personally because it applies to me personally, but please check it out. I always love having individuals that go outside their breadth to check something out and learn, because that's how we grow as people, not only for ourselves, but in our ability to be considerate of other people as well. All right, with that, thank you so much for stopping by, and I will come by with another fun nonfiction book for you in the future. Thank you for listening to Bookwormies, and I'll see you next time. Bye.